Have you ever sat at your kitchen table holding a check or a bank notification from one of your children and felt that strange mix of gratitude and something else? Maybe you couldn't quite name it. Was it unease, a pinch of guilt, or maybe just a little silence sitting in the back of your heart? You tell yourself, they're just helping me. What's the harm? And yet, something shifts. The next time you want to make a small change, maybe a trip to see an old friend, or buying that thing you've had your eye on, you pause. You wonder, will they think I'm being wasteful, irresponsible, a burden? If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. It's something few of us talk about openly, but it's time we did. Because as we grow older, our relationships with our children evolve, and how we manage those changes determines whether we age with grace or with quiet resentment. Today I want to talk to you about something that might challenge you, maybe even upset you at first, but I promise it comes from a place of deep respect. It's the idea that accepting money from your adult married children might not be the act of love you think it is. In fact, it could be the one thing standing in the way of your peace of mind, your dignity, and your freedom. This isn't about pride. It's about something deeper. It's about preserving the essence of who you are, the strong, capable, wise soul who raised a family and has every right to stand tall. When you begin depending on money that isn't your own, even if it comes with smiles and kindness, a shift occurs. Slowly, almost invisibly, the balance in your relationship starts to tilt. Let's start with something that's hard to admit. When you accept money from your children, even with good intentions, you begin to lose a little of your freedom. You don't notice it right away. At first, it's a relief. One less thing to worry about. But then comes the hesitation. You start to think twice before speaking your mind. You soften your opinions. You avoid topics that might cause tension. And gradually, your words lose their edge, your choices lose their spark, and you find yourself shrinking, not in body, but in spirit. A friend of mine, Margaret, told me her story once. She was a retired school teacher who had raised 2 children on her own after her husband passed. One of them, her son, sent her money every month. "Just to help out, Mom," he said. At first, she felt cared for. But over time, something shifted. She wanted to move into a smaller apartment closer to a community center she liked. But she hesitated. "What if he doesn't think it's necessary?" she asked me. "What if he thinks I'm using his money the wrong way?" And that was the moment it hit her. She wasn't poor, but she wasn't free either. Her life had become a quiet negotiation with invisible strings. Margaret eventually made a bold choice. She gave up the monthly help, started renting out her spare room, sold a few of the watercolor paintings she'd made over the years. No, she didn't become wealthy, but she started sleeping better, because she had taken back something money couldn't buy, her self-respect. Here's something philosophy teaches us. Your inner world must remain under your control. Even if your body is under someone else's control, your soul must never be. So ask yourself, what good is financial relief if it costs you your voice? Your independence? That subtle but vital ability to say what you think without second-guessing? Think of it like this. If your home is your castle, your mind is the throne room. And when someone else holds the keys, no matter how loving they are, you're no longer fully in charge. Now let me share another truth that can be even harder to face. When you accept money from your children, you may unintentionally place them in a role they weren't meant to carry. You shift the natural order of the relationship. The parent becomes the dependent. And that weight, over time, can bend even the strongest of bonds. Your son or daughter may not say it. In fact, they'll likely insist they're happy to help. But beneath the surface, there's often a quiet pressure, an emotional weight they carry. Because now they're not just managing their own life, their partner, their kids, their job. They're also responsible for you. And if that dynamic continues unchecked, it creates tension. Not the loud, obvious kind. the silent kind that eats away at connection from the inside out. Walter, a 72-year-old retired electrician I once spoke with, wrote to me and said this: "What hurts most isn't the money. It's feeling like I have to ask permission to live in my own house." His daughter and son-in-law helped pay some of his bills, and slowly they started influencing his decisions. Whether he could have guests over, what furniture he could move, when he could upgrade his phone. It was never cruel, but it was constant. And over time, it chipped away at him. That's the danger we rarely speak about. Not the danger of poverty, but the danger of losing your place in your own life. It doesn't have to be this way. And choosing another path doesn't mean you reject your children's love. It means you protect it. Because real love isn't built on obligation. It's not maintained through monthly transfers. It's nurtured through mutual respect and healthy boundaries. And when your children see you choosing to live within your means, to solve problems creatively, to carry yourself with pride, they respect you more, not less. They feel lighter, freer, and closer to you. Not out of duty, but out of admiration. If you've ever thought, "Well, they can afford it," or "I've done enough for them already," let me offer a gentle perspective. Yes, you gave your all. Yes, you've earned rest. But rest doesn't mean resignation. And what your children need now, more than another bill to pay, is an example of what it looks like to grow older with grace, courage, and strength. They need to see that their mom or dad still has the spark to keep going, still has value to share, still has the wisdom to lead, not by controlling, not by leaning, but by standing tall. There's so much more I want to share with you. Because this conversation isn't about criticism, it's about empowerment. And if any part of you feels a tug, a little voice inside whispering, "Maybe it's time to change," I hope you'll stay with me. You're not alone, and there's so much you can still reclaim. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you made a decision just for yourself without asking, checking, or worrying about what someone else might think? I'm not talking about anything grand. I mean something simple. Choosing where to go, what to buy, what time to go to sleep, what to say. If you're hesitating, it may be because you've already handed over a little more control than you realized. You see, financial dependence doesn't start in your wallet. It starts in your mind. It begins the moment you start adjusting your behavior to maintain someone's support. And the longer that goes on, the easier it is to forget who you were before. What begins as gratitude turns into caution. You speak a little softer. You wait to see how they'll react. You avoid topics that might cause tension. Maybe you don't comment on their spouse's decisions or the way they speak to you, even when it bothers you. You bottle it up. You smile when you're uncomfortable. And little by little, your dignity fades into the background. We're taught that we should never worry about what we can't control. But that also means we must take full responsibility for what we can. And you can take back your life. But to do that, you have to see where you've given parts of it away. And you have to stop letting fear, not love, be the reason you stay silent. Here's what happens when your voice becomes smaller. Your children might not notice at first, but over time, they respond to it. They speak more, you speak less. They decide more, you decide less. And slowly, you become someone who waits, someone who asks, someone who doesn't get consulted, only informed. Not because they don't love you, but because the dynamics have shifted and no one noticed when. And that's how relationships drift. Not with arguments, but with silence. A man named Walter once told me something that stuck with me. He said, "I started to feel like a guest in my own life." That phrase, a guest, that's what it feels like when you no longer get to shape your days. When you're just there, waiting for the next visit, the next transfer, the next favor. And before long, you forget that once upon a time, you were the one others waited for. The one who led, decided, moved forward. But here's the truth. That part of you is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's just been waiting for you. When your choices begin to revolve around someone else's money, even if it's family, your life starts to feel borrowed. And when your life feels borrowed, your confidence suffers. Your opinions feel smaller. Your presence feels like an intrusion. You might find yourself pulling back from conversations, avoiding requests, declining invitations, not because you don't want to participate, but because deep down, you don't feel like it's your place anymore. And that, my friend, is how respect erodes, not through anger, but through absence. Through the absence of your full self. Now you might be thinking, but I still have a good relationship with my children. They say they don't mind helping. They want to. I believe you. And I believe they love you. But love, when mixed with obligation, changes shape. It starts to carry weight. It turns joy into duty. And over time, it leads to something more painful than conflict: resentment. It shows up in little ways. Shorter visits, delayed responses, that tension in the room when money comes up, the hesitance in their spouse's eyes when you mention needing help. And then one day, you realize the hugs feel different. The calls feel scheduled. And though no one says it out loud, you feel it. You're no longer just loved, you're being managed. I say this not to shame you, but to remind you. You have the power to change it. And here's where it gets even more important. When your children are married, your place in their life changes. It has to. They now have another person whose needs, opinions, and well-being take equal priority. When you accept ongoing help, especially financial, you may not realize it, but you start to occupy a space that belongs to both of them, not just your child. And even if your child never complains, their partner may feel the shift. And that can turn into quiet conflict that you're not even aware of. Little by little, they might feel like their choices are under scrutiny, that you're influencing from behind the curtain simply because your presence, supported by their finances, gives you a stake in their household. Maybe they start arguing more. Maybe decisions take longer. Maybe they pull back just a little each time you get too close. And that's not what you want. You're not trying to cause trouble. You're just trying to stay connected. But the connection has to be balanced. And balance requires boundaries. You raised them so they could stand on their own. Now it's time to let them raise their own families without feeling divided. And that means stepping back, not out of rejection, but out of wisdom. This is what it means to live in accordance with nature. And nature, my friend, tells us that every season has its place. As we grow older, we don't lose importance. We shift into a new kind of strength. One that leads not by command, but by quiet example. By presence, not pressure. By being rooted, not needy. Think of yourself like an old tree. You may not grow as fast as you once did, but your roots run deep. You offer shade, shelter, and fruit. And when others come to rest under your branches, they do so because of who you are, not what you ask for. That's what your children need from you now. Not your neediness. Your strength. Not your financial requests. Your clarity. Not your dependency. Your wisdom. You don't have to be wealthy. You just need to reclaim what's already inside you. A spirit that's lived, endured, grown, and can still guide. Not through money, but through meaning. It's not too late to make that shift. It starts small. Maybe it's cutting one small expense. Maybe it's selling something you haven't touched in years. Maybe it's offering your time, your skills, your experience to someone in the community. Not for money, but for pride. For purpose. You don't need to prove anything. But you do need to remember who you are. Because once you start showing up fully again, in your life, your choices, your words, you'll notice something remarkable. Your children will breathe easier. Your conversations will feel lighter. And you'll both feel something that's been missing for a while: mutual respect. not pity, not guilt. Respect. And that more than any check is the greatest gift you can give or receive. There's something incredibly powerful that happens when you begin living on your own terms again. You stop looking outward for validation and start looking inward for direction. You rediscover that quiet strength you always had, the one that carried you through your toughest years, the one that built a family, faced loss, handled uncertainty, and kept going. But here's the hard truth. If you continue accepting help you no longer truly need, you're slowly building your identity around dependence. And the longer you do that, the harder it becomes to untangle who you are from what others give you. That's not living. It's waiting. And you were never meant to wait out your life. Dignity doesn't just come from being self-sufficient. It comes from knowing deep down that you own your choices, that you can make decisions without asking for permission, that your days are not built around someone else's generosity, but around your own sense of purpose. Think of it this way. Every time you pause before making a simple purchase, wondering if your child would approve, that's not financial caution. That's a silent transaction where you trade autonomy for approval. And those trades, over time, leave you feeling small, uncertain, and less alive. That's not how aging should feel. Aging, when done with courage, should feel like refinement. Like stepping into your final decades with grace, not walking on eggshells. A woman once told me, "I feel like the version of me I used to be is standing just outside the room, waiting to be let back in." She said this after admitting she hadn't made a major decision in over a year without checking with her son first. He paid for her utilities, sent grocery money each month, and told her he was happy to help. But she wasn't happy. Not really. Because what she'd lost wasn't money. It was her right to lead her own life. And that loss? It's what quietly eats away at so many people's joy in later life. Not illness, not loneliness, but the subtle erosion of control. The slow fade of relevance. It doesn't have to be this way. And I know it's not easy. I know it's scary. But when you choose to reclaim your place in your own story, you give a gift not just to yourself, but to your family. You show your children, without saying a word, that you still have something to offer, not just something to need. There's also a deeper layer here we haven't touched yet, one that reminds us to face things with honesty. When you remain dependent, even in small ways, you risk confusing love with obligation. This is a painful thing to say, but it must be said. Sometimes what you interpret as love, the regular visits, the check-ins, the financial support, isn't love anymore. It's duty. It's something done out of a sense of responsibility or guilt or social expectation. And when that happens, the relationship changes. It becomes a contract instead of a connection. You'll notice it not in what they say, but in how they say it. In the pauses. In the sighs. In the delay between your message and their reply. And it hurts, because you want their time and care to come from the heart, not from an invisible schedule or family obligation. We're taught that anything done without freedom is empty. And that includes love. True love comes with joy, not pressure. With laughter, not tight smiles. When you constantly accept help without questioning whether it's necessary, you may unintentionally feed the narrative that you are a responsibility to be managed, not a person to be cherished. And that can't be fixed with a kind word or a polite gesture. It can only be restored through action, through pulling back, reassessing, and asking yourself with absolute honesty, am I receiving more than I need? Am I staying small so I can keep receiving it? This might be one of the most dangerous misconceptions we carry into older age. The idea that because we've given so much, we're entitled to ongoing support. Yes, you sacrificed. Yes, you gave everything for your family. But the role of a parent doesn't end in return. It ends in example. And your most powerful example is how you choose to live now, with self-respect or with quiet expectation. Ask yourself this. If tomorrow your children stopped giving, would your love for them change? If the answer is no, then ask the harder question. Shouldn't their love for you be just as free? Because love, when it's real, doesn't need to be bought or proven. It simply is. And this leads us to one final truth. One that few want to admit, but that lives quietly in so many households. When you keep receiving, you keep taking up space that no longer belongs to you. You see, your children have entered a new stage in life. They are raising their own families, building their own homes, learning how to be parents, partners, and providers. And when you stay in a position of need, you unknowingly compete with that. Not because you mean to, but because the space you take, financial, emotional, even physical, is space they need to grow into their own role. When they feel like they're stuck between caring for you and showing up fully for their spouse or kids, something gives. And often, it's the relationship, the warmth, the closeness. I've seen it too many times. The phone calls grow shorter, the visits less frequent, the conversations more formal, not because love has disappeared, but because the weight of the imbalance has taken its place. And so I say this, with all the compassion I can offer, the most loving thing you can do right now is not to hold tighter, but to step back, not to ask for more, but to release what isn't truly necessary, not to wait for them to fill your life, but to begin filling it yourself. Because when you do that, you shift from being someone who needs to someone who leads. Someone who reminds others that life, even at this stage, is still a place to grow, to give, and to glow. You don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to start. One honest question at a time. One clear boundary. One step toward independence. Not for pride, for peace. There comes a moment in every person's life when you have to ask the hardest question of all. Have I been holding on to a role that no longer belongs to me? Not because you're weak or incapable or wrong, but simply because life has changed and you haven't fully changed with it. It's understandable. For decades, you were the center of your family, the one who fixed problems, who made sacrifices, who got up early and stayed up late so your children could grow strong. You were the constant. And now, that role has shifted. But what often keeps us stuck isn't the change itself. It's the refusal to let go of what once made us feel needed, valued, and loved. When we keep accepting money from our children, even in small ways, we cling to a version of ourselves that felt central, essential, even if the present reality no longer supports that role. And when we do that, we stop moving forward. We settle. We justify our dependence with thoughts like, "It's no big deal," or "They want to help," or "This is how we stay close." But those phrases, repeated long enough, become walls. They don't protect you, they trap you. And what they really hide is fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of becoming invisible. But here's the truth. You are not your fear. You are not what others give you. You are not the role you once held. You are what you choose to become today. And if today you decide to let go of that quiet chain of dependence, even if it's just one link at a time, then you are already walking the path back to dignity. Some people will say, "But I don't have a choice." And to that I say, are you sure? Or have you just stopped looking? Because choosing a simpler life, cutting expenses, making small but meaningful adjustments, that's still a choice. Offering your experience as a volunteer, selling a craft, renting out a room, trading skills for small income, those are options. Not glamorous, not grand, but they restore something priceless, your control. This isn't about pretending you're fine when you're not. It's about being honest enough to say, "I want to stand on my own again," even if it's imperfect, even if it's modest, even if it takes time. Because standing, truly standing, isn't measured by how much you have, but by how much you refuse to surrender your spirit. And your children? What they need now more than ever is not your dependence, but your example. They need to see what it looks like to age without bitterness, to grow older without clinging, to stay relevant not by demanding space, but by embodying grace. When they see you living with clarity and quiet strength, you give them a vision of the future that doesn't scare them. You lift the pressure they didn't know they were carrying. You allow their love to breathe again. And love, when it's freed from guilt and duty, flourishes. This may be the moment you've been avoiding, the decision that's been circling your thoughts for months or years, but that you haven't dared to face head-on. If so, let me say this clearly: the time is now. Not next week. Not when the next transfer comes. Not when they bring it up first. Now. Because every day you continue this pattern, you reinforce a dynamic that benefits no one. You drift further from your power, and they drift further from seeing you as the strong, grounded parent they once knew. You still have time to turn it around. Not perfectly, but truthfully. Look in the mirror tonight and ask, what am I still asking for that I could learn to give myself again? Maybe it's not money. Maybe it's confidence. Maybe it's purpose. Whatever it is, begin there. The path isn't about denying pain or pretending life is easy. It's about facing life with open eyes and calm strength. And now, at this stage of your life, it is more vital than ever that you take up that mantle. Show your family what it looks like to live without excuses. Show them what courage looks like at 60, 70, 80. Show them that the truest kind of legacy isn't wealth. It's the memory of a parent who didn't wait to be rescued, who didn't fade into the background, who stood even when it was hard, who chose self-respect over comfort. You may not change everything overnight, but you can start. You can begin. And with every step you take back toward your own strength, something else happens too. You become the root again. The one who grounds the family, not by holding on, but by letting go. That's the paradox. When you stop needing to be at the center, your influence quietly grows. When you stop leaning, others lean in. And when you stop accepting help you don't truly need, you give your children the space to become who they were meant to be. Strong, clear, independent, just like you once were. So if you've heard something today that made your heart ache a little, that stirred something deep and uncomfortable, good. That means you're ready. You're not here just to listen. You're here to live differently. And if you agree, if you feel that spark inside beginning to rise again, I invite you to leave a comment and write, I reclaim my power. Not for me, for you, for your peace, for your family, for your future. And if this message resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We're building something special here, a space for honest conversations, for real growth, for people who are done living in fear or guilt or quiet frustration. You're not alone. We walk this road together, one decision at a time, one truth at a time, one act of courage at a time. Because dignity doesn't retire, wisdom doesn't expire, and it is never ever too late to start living free.